Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this early afternoon, evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Diane Alvarado. I work with College SAI part-time and the Matchlighters Scholars Program to provide professional development webinars for counselors who are serving any number of students that identify as first-gen, low-income, or otherwise underrepresented in the college access space. It is November, and I know it is crunch time for you all as counselors, and so I really, really appreciate you all being here this evening to hear from the wonderful Danny, who is going to talk to us about supporting first-gen low-income students, specifically within the Common App and different ways to utilize the Common App to best contextualize a student and tell their story. Danny is a counselor at We Go to College LLC, and he is a wonderful counselor with a lot of experience and expertise, particularly in supporting FGLI students. And so I'm so excited to have him joining us this evening. Our wonderful moderator, Jasmine, is going to drop in the chat our live session survey, which is really helpful information for us to learn about who's in the room and also what topics you all are hoping to see from us as we start to think to 2026 and what this FGLI webinar series can look like in the future. So please do take a moment to fill that out. Some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording in a follow-up email tomorrow. If you have questions at any point during the webinar, we encourage you to use the Q&A function as Danny and I have some time set aside towards the end to go through Q&A and answer any other questions that you all have on this evening's topic. And I think that's it from me. So I think without further ado, I am so happy to pass it over to Danny to get us started this evening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, everyone. I really appreciate being here. This, I always enjoy to be able to do things like this, especially presentations I haven't done before, and I'd love to be able to build things up from scratch. So I'm very excited to get into it. To talk a little bit about myself, I've been doing college counseling for over 12 years now. So I've worked in public schools, charter schools, um, private school. I currently work at a private school full time in Chelsea, and then of course, we go to college where I do have individual clients here and there, but the major focus of it is working with high schools and CBOs on their programming, and I tend to do PDs as well and one-off workshops for students and helping high schools and organizations build up their college counseling. So here we go. Oh, and also, I'm also formerly a low-income student and a first-gen high school and college graduate from East New York, Brooklyn. What was it doing? There we go. So, as I said, first-generation high school and college graduate, grew up on public assistance in public housing in East New York, Brooklyn. If you aren't familiar with East New York, definitely a really, at least when I was growing up, I was speaking to CB earlier today. It's nice to that's in East New York, and so it's nice to hear a little bit more of the development that's happening there. But it was definitely an interesting time growing up in East New York, and I went away to college and I graduated debt free. And I mentioned my years of experience before already. So one of the things I really wanted to talk about is, in case you guys didn't know, from time to time, Common App puts out these reports, quarterly. They just put out one recently that goes through the November 1st deadline. So if you ever get the chance, I definitely suggest take a look at those reports because they're very interesting stuff in there. But I took some two charts from the end of the year one that came out some months ago to be able to, show you guys just like how much, college, the application process has grown so much for first gen students, for low income students. I think a lot to my time applying to Common App 20 years ago. Pretty crazy to think. And that was a time when I had to physically mail the applications, and thankfully I had an uncle who worked in a magazine mailroom, so I didn't have to bear the cost of sending all those applications. But you could see, especially during the pandemic, because guess what happened, right? Most schools went test optional, so more students started to apply. So you could see from the last cycle compared to the cycle before it, there's a 40% increase amongst first generation students. So first generation apps on the Common App, because it's so, easy to apply to school these days on the Common App, more and more first gen students are applying, and at a faster pace than continuing gen students. And then when we look at low income students, and I use the signifier of the fee waiver for this portion because I feel that was the chart that made the most sense. You can see dramatic growth as well. Again, a lot of it has to do with uh, most schools being test optional and a lot of schools joining the Common App as well. So, one of the things I really wanted to talk about, especially if you happen to work at a CBO or if you happen to work at a high need high school, um, or maybe you are just volunteering your time, right? Um, it's very important that, and I really wanted to take this moment before we really get into the meat and potatoes of things to really make the case for college, right? Of course, we know that with, as you attain higher education, the more money you're able to make on average, right? And the more likely you are to be employed. So, it's very important to be able to show those students, show families as well, that data. And I started doing this for the past couple of years, and I see, how much that works wonders. So, you'll get the time to be able to get these slides at some point. And these are the resources that I've used to be able to show students what, a particular career, like that first link that they might be interested in. What do you require? What is required of you education wise? What is the growth looking like over time? What is the income looking like over time, right? College scorecard, my favorite website, probably of all time. The great thing about college scorecard is that you're able to see, kind of like starting salaries. You're able to see like average debt, loan repayment rates. And I use those particular things to be able to show students one particular school that I'm, trying to suggest to them and push them towards of the likelihood that you're gonna come out with a good job because you're able to pay back your loan on time. Maybe you paid it back in full within 2 years. So definitely great resource. The third link, the federal loan simulator, to be able to show students, what will your monthly loan payment look like over time when you graduate from college, and it also pulls data from college scorecard from that particular school that the student will graduate from, or and sometimes the major if that data is available too, salary data via major, and be able to show what it would look like to be able to be on certain plans, what the monthly minimum would be, what would you need to pay, what amount you need to pay monthly to be able to get aid within a certain time period. And then, of course, cost of living calculator, right? You could show students how much it costs to live in your particular city now, right? And then also kind of letting them know it might get more expensive over time. So yeah, I think it's very important that we have this conversation with students about the economic opportunity that college can provide versus any other opportunities. And of course I know there's other opportunities like trade school and whatnot, so it's very important to be able to let students know what does it take to be able to get into a particular career, what salaries look like, what cost of living look like, because they're usually conversations that they aren't having. So, and with working this population, it's very important to be able to have a hands-on approach, right? And this stuff is stuff I've done all throughout my career, and it's always been interesting, more particularly when I went to St. Louis and worked at a private school there. How fascinated people were with like, oh, you meet with the students very frequently and whatnot, and the families really loved it and things like that. And then I was just like, oh, well, this is kind of like regular to me. This is what I was used to doing. So, in case you're not, I definitely would suggest then bi-weekly meetings with students, helping them give feedback on their essays, the college lists, reviewing their applications for any errors, their Common App or financial aid applications for any errors. And I tend to follow up with a to-do list for students after, like, okay, you need to teacher recommendations. You need to um, work on incorporate my suggestions for your essay or whatever else. Another thing you could do too, and I definitely suggest doing this every year because the Common App somewhat changes from year to year, is that you could create a practice account on Common App. So the way you do that is like how every student signs up initially for the Common App, and then you'll see an option to select a practice account. This is very helpful for you to be able to see what the student experience is like, filling out the main part of the Common App, and to be able to fill out individual college questions as well. And if you're ever curious about after August 1st, what supplemental essays are looking like, you could do that with the practice account. Have students add you as an advisor on Common App under recommender. So this will give you the ability to be able to, on the recommender side, to view students' applications as long as they click that preview button anytime you want. And that's been so helpful to me to be able to, if I'm talking to a college and I need to reference something on a student's application, I could just easily put it up, click into the student's application, and it's all there. And it's especially helpful if your school doesn't have, or your CBO doesn't have, a college application management system. So you can see right then and there, all right, these are the schools that the student applied to on the Common App. Provide college suggestions based off of income and grades. So, if your program, I'm sorry, if your state has any special programs, like here in New York State, we have high education opportunity program, college discovery, and oh man, the 4-year one escapes me for CUNY, but it when there are programs available for this particular population in your state, definitely learn more about them if you aren't so familiar with them, especially if you're working at a private school, to be able to, guide students to a great opportunity where they're going to be supported academically, um, probably even get financial aid, maybe even full need financial aid, and you know, definitely when it comes to students who have really great grades, right? Put them on to other schools that in different states as well, and assist them with applying to full ride scholarships. Whether it's the Jack Kent Cook Scholarship that happens to also be on the Common App, or any other, those scholarships as well, and help them navigate the demonstrated interests, how to do demonstrated interests, and you might want to also discuss with them applying or your decision to full need schools. And the last part, here, that I think is, uber important, is advocating for to colleges, right? Maybe you go to conferences and you build relationships with folks. Maybe you go to console tours, same thing, or even, your state has these special programs, like here in our state, HEOP and EOP, and you build relationships with those directors and advisors to be able to push your students along through those, kind of rigorous drawing kind of processes as well when it comes to proving a student's income. So, I will never forget just like how big of a deal it was, especially as we know last year of, what was happening with student visas and whatnot, and a lot of colleges going to the wait list pretty late in the game. And I learned from a college that I worked with, sort of last year. Um, and when I was working with a student in the South Bronx from a previous job that I continue to work with, he ended up getting off the wait list, low income student from the South Bronx, at a full need school. And then, that within itself was shocking to me. But a lot of that had to do with, me making that initial contact with the representative, and the representative, emailed me after the fact and acknowledged that. And it was just like, wow, like for me, it was like, been doing this for 10 plus years. And that was such a so shocking moment that, something that I thought was kind of like a shot in the dark. Let me just reach out and see. And now that student's there, when that student, current options would have, left with quite a hefty debt. Um, so definitely advocate for your students too. Now, one of the things I really want to address is direct admissions. So Common App has the direct admissions program, and students get offers once they put in like their GPA and test scores and where they live and things like that. So, with this population of students, I definitely want to encourage y'all to encourage your students to ignore these things, these offers, because they are most likely to not get any great aid. The last thing we want is to be able to have students put so much stuff and emotion into something like direct admissions, and then it doesn't work out financially. And then, you as the counselor have to deal with the blowback back in the sense of like, all right, how do I console this student, who I guess kind of like fell in love with, oh, I got accepted with this opportunity and things like that. Oftentimes we know what the effect of having that first acceptance can have on a student. So now we're going to actually get into the meat and potatoes of key parts of the Common App. So after the Supreme Court's affirmative action case, should students fill out the demographics section? I say yes. I think this is important to be able to have this data for future studies and policy and whatnot. So definitely encourage them to do it. It's so important for what the future holds for us, and to see like how colleges approach this case in the future, or any policy changes that happen in the future as well. Because this, whatever comes out, the data that we see and what have you, can help you prepare for the next class in the future in general. So, and don't overlook the Common App fee waiver section. I'm glad it significantly changed from when I used to be on the counselor advisory committee with Common App. So it's a lot more fluid and simpler to read than what it was before. And make sure that you run through all these different things with your student. More particularly, even if you work at a private school, because I worked at a private school in St. Louis where they wouldn't tell me, who was on financial aid. I had to um, be upfront and ask the student, right? If they were, so that way I can be able to properly help them with, all right, make sure you click the box on the fee waiver, and then of course helping them with FAFSA, CSS profile, things like that. So make sure they don't skip this. And again, you might have to explain some of these things to them, because they might not be familiar with what these things are. They might not know what a Pell Grant is yet. So for the family section, please make sure that they share their parents' employment and education, because this would give more data, right? That is helpful for the future in terms of like the enrollment at a particular college when it comes to first generation students. Of course, excuse me, low income students as well. And on the education section, make sure that they are filling out under the college and university section, that if they took a college class, like right, in a summer program at a college, or do enrollment at their school, or even outside of their high school. I know some cities, like here in New York City, the Sydney University New York system, that particular college will partner locally with high schools in the city for the program called College Now. And oftentimes students forget to put that on their Common App. So, on the degree section, I personally think the weighted GPA looks better if your school does weighted GPA. And then when it comes to the honor section, it's always trouble. The students can't remember the awards that they got since ninth grade. So in the event that they do, right, and they happen to have more than five, you can only put five on there. Tell them, which five do you care about the most? Which five are your favorite, right? And then once they put all of that stuff down, then you'll notice that there are kind of like arrows on the side, and have them order it according to what they feel most proud of, what they feel most passionate about. Because these arrows are there for a reason, and it shows colleges, all right, what a student really cares about the most when it comes to this particular section, and then there's going to be another section that does something similar later on. I'll explain. So, testing, right? So, um, report passing scores for AP exams, I would say, and then when it comes to SAT and ACT scores, where the student fits within that range, and the school is test optional. Obviously, if the school is required, there's no overlooking this. But definitely have the student put it down if they fit in the range. And the great thing about Common App, and I oftentimes see, not a lot of people notice, is that, of course, you constantly probably do. You can submit them one by one, right? So if a student is applying, it tends to apply to the school test optional, and then another school. Oh, I'm gonna put my test scores here to this school. They can turn this section on and off with each submission. So when a student chooses to report their SAT and ACT scores, you might be familiar. There might be a pop up. There'll be a pop up that student puts, like a little square that says SAT, ACT, and then AP could be another one. If the student is taking AP exams, that they're reporting some of those scores, this student can uh, click out, click the X on the SAT, ACT if they don't intend on being that college seeing their scores and they're applying test optional. So, this is why this particular this particular section is why oftentimes I prefer to sit down with students like, all right, um, more particularly if done the fee waiver, right? Sit down with them, let's submit it together one by one. So that way, they don't end up making a mistake like this where they keep the section up, because you're not entirely sure if the college will see it or not. Some colleges do block it. But we want to make sure that the student best represent themselves how they want to be seen in this process. Now the other part of the application where you can maneuver things up and down is the activity section. So definitely if a student has done more than 10 activities, that's school, outside of school, um then I tell them to list their favorite 10, right? And then you'll see here too, they have the ability to move them up and down. So have them move them up and down according to what they feel most passionate about and order it that way. So, some examples, and you kind of want to help them refresh their memory. I even do this today, even in my full-time role with students, like spelling out different things that, oh, have you done this? Have you done that? And whatnot. To help refresh their memory, or maybe the thing that they do, they might not necessarily think so much about. Oh, there's something I could put on here, whether it's like a internship that they did or a job, even if it's getting paid in cash, like babysitting, for example, um, student clubs, sports, clubs and sports outside of school, summer programs, CBO involvement, volunteering, self-studying, like if they're self-studying for any AP exams or any of their own interests and interesting hobbies as well. So definitely have them order their activities according to their passion. And new this year, I was very excited to see this. Last year colleges were running a pilot of this checklist that you see here of because it used to be like, all right, you know, oftentimes if you had the know-how, you would tell students like, all right, if you take care of your siblings, put that in the activity section. If you take care of an elderly adult in your home, put that in your activity section, right? Um, but oftentimes maybe the students during this application on their own, they might not have a counselor who would have told them these things. And this is why I'm very grateful for this checklist because it addresses all of those things. So, so your student does not necessarily need to put these things that are on this checklist onto the activities section. They could just check these boxes off here when it's applicable to them, whether it's like I mentioned before, taking care of siblings, taking care of elderly adults, and whatnot, translating, for their family and whatnot, um, traveling long distance to their school. So definitely make sure that they are utilizing this too, and get them to think, very deeply, ask them questions. They might take care of their siblings and not necessarily think much about it. They might take care of a grandparent and not necessarily think much about it. So um make sure that they're filling this out as well too, because especially in the instance where the student might not have as much activities because they were doing all this stuff in the home, have so many family responsibilities. Now, personal essay, right? So we never want to encourage students and pressure them to, trauma dump, right? Like we want to assist students with telling the story they feel best represents them, so it could be about like I remember one year a student wanted to write about working in a comic book store, right? And um, with I used to be a journalist, so I like to be able to ask questions and get people to think more deeply about what they're writing about. So so he expanded upon that, on the things that he learned from it, the people he interacted with, and the things he learned from them. What is it? How to help them in other avenues in his life currently? What does it make him think about his future and whatnot? And if you come across students who are just totally stuck, College Essay Guy has so many great brainstorming exercises that I do use with students as well, to be able to get them to think about particular things that they might in their lives that they might be interested in writing about. And when reviewing drafts, make sure you ask them questions about what you're reading, to get them to expand on things, or for instance, let's see, 'cause one thing I commonly come across was students who will talk about other people, family members or whatnot, but not necessarily incorporate themselves in the story, right? So oftentimes I will ask them, you know, more specifically about like why you mentioning this person, what does this person mean to you, um, and why you and whatnot, to be able to help the students steer the essay to be more about them. And and I would say too, and I've definitely done this a couple of times, when a student doesn't feel comfortable talking about something that you are personally aware of, um ask them if they're okay with you talking about it in their recommendation. And I've definitely done that a couple of times as well, because I think it's helpful to be able to for colleges to be able to see, all right, the student in the whole context, not only within our school community, right, but in their whole life in general. um because they might be things that the students experience, that you know still shows how resilient they are by being successful in the school, or what have you. And it could be a major piece in their story, so you don't want to push them write them to write that themselves. Typically, for me it'll be like, I don't know, 2 or 3 sentence kind of mention, um whether it's like, all right, oftentimes I would discover, um, from a parent would tell me, yeah, one time I got injured pretty badly, and then my child helped me, took care of me for X amount of months, fed me, whatever else, took care of household items, and it'll be something I've never even heard from the student themselves. Um, and that was such a significant portion of their time in high school, that it's all part of the narrative. When we think about the essay, when we think about our counselor recommendation, and I'll definitely even encourage UCDO folks out there to tell them to invite you on the other recommender and write a recommendation for them as well too, because you know them in another aspect too that the school might not necessarily know them. It's important that we help students tell their stories through their main essay and through our recommendations. So additional information section. Now this part here, you can kind of read through it, and this gives students the opportunity to be able to share anything that might have disrupted their educational experience in high school. So I'll give you an example. Could be like a student who what was the reason why students jumped around in so many schools, right? Like the student might have mentioned it under the education section, kind of briefly, but the additional information section kind of can give them the opportunity to, dig a little bit deeper with it in a shorter way. So again, it can help adjust and combat to why a student's grades might look what they look like, right? Because it could be a whole lot of factors that mm, might have happened to the student. And then that second screenshot there on the right side, I tend to help students use that for like, all right, like um I don't know, like you're an artist and you have an Instagram account where you showcase your art. Um, Post it there, right? That's your opportunity to be able to help showcase something in a different way. Um, Hopefully a college will see it. I know when I read applications for University of California, San Diego, I read everything that a student posts. If a student included a URL, I checked it out. I want to see what it was like. So um, you never know, right? We want to be able to help our students shine in ways that they might not think about. College questions, right? So you know, you want to make sure that one thing I don't like about the college questions is that sometimes it's very hard to be able to tell the difference between certain sections within a section. Sometimes it's hidden essays in there, right? Like you can answer something and then the essay will pop up. Or maybe there's an essay in there and but there's such a long word of text that you could easily miss it. So I would definitely say, sit down with the students and, definitely review the section with them as well, especially if that school asks us about their preference for testing, whether applying, yeah, don't review my test scores, review them. Um, am I applying for need-based financial aid? Things like that. And having them go over this, college questions, at least initially, they could come up with a plan on how to pace themselves for any supplemental essays that they have to write. And again, College Essay Guy has great tips on how to write, the most common supplemental essays like why major, why this school, and writing about your favorite extracurricular activity. Now we have here towards the end. So, you know, I definitely will take a look at some questions that we have in the chat. But if you definitely would like to reach out to me, my email's there, my website's there, the QR code, go to my LinkedIn, so you can feel free to add me on there. But for now, I'll take a look at any questions that folks might have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. So I see one question from an audience member, and it's a doozy. So, in talking about
Yeah, I
kind of the
know.
demographics information, we're in a really tricky time sociopolitically, and so do you have any thoughts, or how are you advising students who maybe are
Right.
debating whether or not to disclose undocumented status in this political climate?
Yeah. That's a totally a double-edged sword. I think I don't get that question. What I get more so is um with undocumented parents when it comes to the FAFSA. So I think and usually my answer is like whatever you feel is appropriate for you and your family, and I think in this case when it comes to applying to colleges, right? What is the particular college saying about um serving and protecting those kind of students, that population of students, right? Do you feel comfortable enough to share that information, right? I mean, somehow, some way, they'll find out when you don't submit a FAFSA. and or if you're in the great state of New York and you do New York State tap for the New York State Dream Act, um to get New York State tap, they'll know somehow some way, right? So um I think it's more so is this hasn't been something that come up specifically when it comes to application, but I will say as a sidebar when it comes to the FAFSA, I totally understand the climate that we're in right now, and I would just preface things by saying the importance of the child to be able to get the funding that they need to be able to, the Pell Grant in particular, and maybe even your state grant if they do need base aid. One of the things that shocked me about living in Missouri was how there was so much more money for testing test scores than anything else. Very weird, but um that we think about um what is the best path forward for that student, that family, and then show them all the options, right? So talk to them through all the options, and seeing how they want to move forward from there.
Yeah, definitely. This audience member shared a little bit more context and
Sure.
on their particular situation, and so they're kind of debating whether or not to share, this status with a private university in Florida or Texas that no longer provide in-state tuition for undocumented students, um, and then private universities who fund 100% need for undocumented students. So it's tricky.
Yeah, yeah. I think again is it depends on like doing some in-depth research about the state in general, right? The school's policy in general. What is the leader saying? What is admissions counselor saying? What is the director of admissions saying about that population of students to be able to have an informed decision about how to move forward, and maybe even should I even apply to that school? So it takes a lot more in-depth research to be able to see if that student's gonna uh be protected, right? Of course, one thing we're gonna think about these days is they're gonna allow ICE on campus, right? What is their approach with that? So, when we work in that population, we have to talk them through questions that they should ask, right? Research they should do. So when they get to that next level, hopefully they'll be in a place where they'll be supported and protected.
Yeah, definitely. And we did a session back in March of this year for this webinar series that was on supporting undocumented students. And so for this particular audience member, I definitely encourage you to check that recording. It was a lot of good information on how to research which schools are undocu friendly versus less so. But I would also say in my experience that changes in in-state tuition for undocumented students is definitely tricky, and also considering what transportation would look like for this particular student. I don't know where you're based, but if it would require out of state travel, just thinking about all of those pieces when deciding whether or not to apply and disclose. We have another audience member that says there's a scholarship that an FGLI student is applying to that is sponsored by an organization that tilts conservative. The essay question is about American values under attack and how would the student help make a difference. She's nervous about how to address this because she
Mhm.
wants to win, obviously. What do you suggest, or any tips on
So
things like that?
interesting. Yeah. I One thing I always tell students is to be their authentic selves throughout this whole process, right? And I think when it comes to, scholarships like that, or any other opportunities they come across, kind of have to think pretty critically about does do the values align, right, with me? And even then too, even if it might feel conservative and the student and might not necessarily be that, how do I answer this question in a way that's authentic to me, right? Like in this case, what American values I feel are under attack, right? As someone who's progressive, I could give you answers to that. You know what I mean? Like that's definitely a direction that I could go for in a way that they may not necessarily be thinking about. So I think it's again, whether any scholarship, Common App, whatever, interviews, whatever, that student becomes authentically themselves throughout the process.
Hmm. Yeah. And the scholarship supports under-resourced students in the Denver area, so meant for her. But yeah, definitely, I think I underline a lot of what Danny just said of I think regardless, answering the question in a way that feels very true to the student and whether or not they get it. Obviously, I definitely understand the importance of that. Um, Hi, Lee. Sorry, I just got a notification that there's someone from a Boston-based CBO. Hello. Um, yeah, I definitely think that answering authentically is going to be the best bet. And also, yeah, it's definitely difficult, but encouraging to make sure that that answer is very authentic to the student. But similarly, Danny, this made me think of a different question related to
Mhm.
writing the personal statement or any supplemental
Yeah.
essay. I think sometimes what I've seen in the college access world is actually students feeling very inclined to talk about trauma or talk about difficult circumstances,
Hmm.
under the impression that that might make them stand out in the admissions process. But
Yeah.
sometimes these students are very multifaceted and have other kind of pieces that might be better suited to underscore in something like a personal statement. Do you have any experience with that or any advice for
Yeah.
counselors having to kind of maybe talk students in a different direction when it comes to approaching the personal
Yeah.
statement or other written work?
I definitely have. That's such a great question. There's definitely been times where I asked a student and I straight up asked them, is this something you really want to work or write about? Is this something that um you feel best represents you? Um if you were to go up to a stranger in the street, right? Like, is this something that um you think defines you? Is this your core story or whatnot? Or I think oftentimes students, whether it's the activity list, essay, interview, whatever, will try to do things in a way where they think, okay, this is a college one here, rather than again centering themselves, right? Like, what do you care about? What are you passionate about? Kind of a stuff, and then you know that's definitely an opportunity too for me to say, like, hey, you don't have to write about this if you don't feel comfortable doing so. And I kind of notice too when they're struggling um to write it and kind of like dragging their feet along with it, or it's kind of like all over the place if I'm asking like specific questions, and I notice their body language and things like that, and then it becomes a conversation piece about, all right, let's um maybe focus on maybe a certain aspect of it that you feel more comfortable talking about, or maybe something completely different, and this is where it's helpful to try your best to, and having the frequent meetings with students is helpful in the sense of you get to know them a little bit more on a deeper level and whatnot, and you can even say, like, all right, if you feel as if this is something important for you to mention and whatnot, then this is something that I could mention in my recommendation instead. You don't have to go through the crying pain, because I've been there myself before too, in terms of, excuse me, in terms of the essay I wrote 20 years ago, and all of the drama that it caused back then for me. But it the thing we want to do is be able to protect our students, make them feel safe, and make them feel as if they feel comfortable with how they're presenting themselves, right? So and then being their ally in the process of, like, all right, again, if you feel this is important to be mentioned, I could do that for you, so you don't have to do that, and you can talk about this other thing that you really care about, that you're passionate about, or whatever interesting story that you have.
Yeah, definitely. And last question for me, but I encourage, our audience members to ask any other questions they have in Q&A. But kind of relatedly, Danny, any kind of anecdotes or just specific examples of when you have kind of adapted a student's story into that recommendation letter, and like best practices when it comes to that, or
Yeah.
just kind of specific examples of contextualizing a student particularly as a recommender.
Yeah, I know people have different formats, things like that. I tend to like for me, if the academics are a good story to tell, that's typically where I start. Like framing where the student is academically within their class, or talk about their level of rigor, especially if they're taking college classes outside of the school and I'm aware of what grade that they got, and I saw the proof of that. That's something that I mentioned as well. Like for instance, I would say like, oh, this student took the equivalent over the past 4 year, I mean 2 years, the equivalent of at least one semester of full time, right? So, um, in comparison to their peers, or I'll say something like, and I before I left my job in the South Bronx school 2 years ago, I wrote a good portion of those recommendations before I left, because I felt like it was uber important for me to do so. And in those things, I've written things such as like, oh, this student exhausted all of the English curriculum before senior year, and now he's taking this college level writing course instead outside of our school. Um, so setting that context, and then um, that talking about the surrounding environment. If that isn't necessarily clear in the school profile, or if you don't necessarily have a school profile, or a CVO profile, right? Talking about the environment the student is in, what the school environment is like, and kind of like right there is where you set the stage of, if if there's a particular thing to bring up that the student feels comfortable with you bringing up, inserting that there, because it's like, all right, the student at this level, of rigor, grades, if the test scores made sense, I kind of put that into context as well. Um, and then talking about this other aspect of it too, like, yes, the student has done really great academically, despite all these other things that they were enduring, right? That they were not necessarily um uh talk about. And then ending more on the note too of if they done stuff in the community, whether in our school community or outside of the school community, kind of like wrapping it up with that, right? And that's typically kind of like the you know general format I would, and I know there's a whole art to writing constant recommendations. I could tell you when I first started doing it, I sucked at it, and it took a while for me to get the hang of it and used to it. And the way I got it, where I knew like I really hit a stride and be able to tell a student story in the context within our school and in their community, was when I started to get comments from reps about how impactful the impression that letter left on them.
Yeah, definitely. I've not worked for an institution of higher education before, but I do work for an organization that takes applications that mirror the Common App, and so I can definitely attest to the fact that the strongest recommendation letters I see blend that kind of like qualitative and quantitative data. So don't necessarily always assume that they will read the school profile and compare that to the transcript. If you can make that connection and really say like a student has maxed out on AP courses or has taken the most amount for their particular academic path, that is always to a student's benefit. So keeping those tips in mind, I think is super important. I'm not seeing anything else in Q&A, which tells me, Danny, that your presentation was just wonderfully clear, and that everybody is just absolutely fully armed with knowledge and expertise. So from one New Yorker to another, Danny, I truly thank you for joining us tonight,
Thank you.
for all of the wonderful information. Like we had mentioned in the chat and earlier at the beginning of the session, everyone, we will be sharing a copy of the slide deck as well as any associated resources and a copy of this recording in a follow-up email tomorrow. Connect with Danny, and I thank you all for joining us for this webinar series for 2025. We won't be having a December session, so I will see you all in January 2026 with some awesome content. And yeah, thank you all for being here, for being in community, and for engaging with content from wonderful folks like Danny. I hope you all have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
rest of your year, holiday season, all of the things. And thanks again, Danny, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice night, y'all. Bye.